All right, class. In the last section, we were talking about the production function and how there's a technical relationship between inputs and outputs. And we got into talking about total product and marginal physical product, and how marginal physical product, if you remember, is a change in output per 1 unit change in input. Well, now that we have that technical relationship, that input-output relationship, we're going to add more onto it. And what we're going to add onto it is actually the costs. We're going to go in and start diving into costs, the total cost, fixed cost, and variable cost. We're going to figure out the different costs of production, and then we're going to dive into revenue streams as well. And ultimately, where we're going to end up is we're going to be talking about profit maximization. What is the profit maximizing level of input and output? So we talk about total cost of production. The costs associated with the use of all inputs. So whenever we're talking about total cost is the cost associated with the use of all inputs in production. And we actually break these down into two groups, and we already talked about them a little bit. We're going to break this total cost aspect down into two groups. Group A is fixed costs, and then Group B are these variable costs right here. So what are fixed costs? Fixed costs do not change. That's the key aspect. They do not change with the level of variable input used. So aspects such as fixed costs might be payments on tractors, land payments, salaries. So from month to month, the tractor payment doesn't change. Land payment doesn't change. Salaries don't change. They don't change from year to year. It doesn't matter whether you produce zero of your commodity or maximize your output on that commodity. Your fixed costs stay the same. So if your costs do not change based off of the level of input or even the level of output, that's a fixed cost. Like I was saying, it's things like tractor payments, it's land payments, it's salaries, it's all of those things that are a constant price from month to month and do not change. That is the key aspect about a fixed cost, is they do not change with the level of inputs. On the other hand, we have these variable costs. So these variable costs changes with the level of variable inputs used. So these variable costs are aspects such as labor costs when paid hourly. So you think about it, the more you work, the more time you put in, the more you expect to get out. Or the more input that you put in, the more you have to pay for it. So if you're paying somebody hourly, labor costs hourly, the more they work, the more labor they put in, the more it costs you. Such as fuel for a tractor would be another variable cost. The more you drive that tractor, the more you use that input, the more it's going to cost. Now, the fuel for the tractor would be a variable cost because the more you use that tractor, the more it costs. But think about the payment of a tractor. It doesn't matter whether or not you're driving that tractor 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, or you leave it parked in the shed for a whole month. The tractor payment is still going to stay the same. But what about your fuel bill for that tractor? Your fuel bill is obviously going to be higher whenever you're using that tractor 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Fertilizer costs are another one. Those are all input costs, so are variable costs. So think about it this way. What if you hired somebody and paid them hourly, but didn't work them any at all? What would your labor costs be? Well, they'd be zero. Versus if you worked them 100 hours, they'd be a lot more. Fertilizer costs. What if you put out no fertilizer? What would your fertilizer cost be? Versus over here, on these fixed costs, it doesn't matter whether you use it or not. You still have to pay the same amount. So we'll also talk about some other important concepts, such as marginal and average costs. After we've gone through and defined total cost and total fixed cost and total variable cost, and we dive into all that, then we're going to throw in some more formulas, more equations, and we're actually going to calculate marginal and average cost. So we said that the total cost is the cost associated with the use of all inputs in production. And then we define total costs as having two different categories, fixed, these fixed costs and these variable costs. So how do we calculate total cost? Well, total cost, very simply, ladies and gentlemen, is the total fixed costs plus the total variable costs. So if I wanted to figure out my total cost down here on this table, I'm going to simply take my fixed cost plus my variable cost. And if I add both of those together, I'm going to get this total cost all the way down. So 100 plus 50 is 150. 100 plus 80 is 180. And we can do that all the way down to calculate our total cost. So our total fixed costs are all of the fixed costs added together. So now that we have this total cost figured out, that it's the total fixed cost plus the total variable cost, now we have to figure out what is our total fixed cost. Well, our total fixed costs are all of the fixed costs added together. So down here on this table, we see that our total fixed cost is equal to 100 for this first row. We get down here to the third row, it's still 100. We get all the way down here to the bottom two rows, and both of them are each still 100. Why is that the case? Because your fixed costs do not change, ladies and gentlemen. They will not change. It doesn't matter how much input you use, your fixed cost remains the same all the way down. Why is that? Because those are those fixed costs, and it doesn't matter, like we talked about using that tractor, it doesn't matter if you leave that tractor parked or use it a whole bunch. Your total fixed cost still remains the same. It will not change. Now your variable cost, on the other hand, is equal to the number of inputs times the price per input. So in this case, we hire 10 hours of labor at $5 an hour. Somehow we're managing to pay this person $5 an hour. So if we work that person for 10 hours at $5 an hour, what is our total variable cost? Well, we take the number of hours times the price of the input. So $5 times 10, we have a total variable cost of $50. So total variable cost in this first aspect is at $50 because it's the amount of labor times the price per hour. So something that's interesting to note is that the more that you work this particular individual for $5 an hour, the more your total variable cost increases. The more it goes up. So obviously, if you work somebody or you work yourself for 10 hours and you're paid hourly, you're going to get paid more than if you work, or paid less than if you worked 62 hours. And it only makes sense that your variable cost is going up. So just a quick recap, you have total cost is equal to the fixed cost plus the total variable cost. The total fixed costs are all of the fixed costs added together. These fixed costs do not change as the level of input changes. But you have also these variable costs. These variable costs are calculated by taking the number of inputs times the price per input. And now variable costs are going to increase as the input increases. So the variable costs, they do change. So we can always calculate, as long as we have our daily labor use and our fixed cost, we can always calculate, and we also know what the price per input is. We can calculate this total variable cost and in turn calculate our total cost as well.